On the phone, we have one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history. He played for the Rams and also for the Eagles. He was just a phenomenal player. He was a passing quarterback back when there weren't passing quarterbacks and they would just hand off. Roman Gabriel. How you doing, Roman?
Well, David, I'm fine, and I appreciate the fact that somebody cares when you're 74 years old. They wants to talk to somebody like me.
Hey, I remember when you were playing, so that David's a lot younger. He doesn't remember. He doesn't remember any of that. He only knows what he's seen on film and things like that. I remember watching on television.
So, thank you.
You grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina.
That's correct. The home of Sonny Jurgensen and Michael Jordan and Kenny Gaddison and Trot Nixon and a whole bunch of folks.
Don't leave out Meadowlark Lemon.
Oh, yeah, Meadowlark. I forgot it. I'm glad you reminded me because Meadowlark and I and Sonny went in the Wilmington Hall of Fame at the same time.
Okay. Was there any temptation for you to go out of state to college?
Well, I was fortunate. I had, because I was not only a football player, I played all three of those big sports. And one of the offers I had was Notre Dame, but it was a little too far for me to fund to get there and get back home.
So how did you turn down the priests and nuns at Notre Dame? It had to be hard.
Well, it was, except it was too far to go trying to thumb back and forth. And North Carolina State was one of the few schools that allowed me to play all three sports for a couple of years until I wanted to make my mind up.
Which one were you best at, or which one did you like the most?
Well, actually, as I started out, baseball was my number one sport. And now, if you talk to my friends who are still alive, some of them, they'll say basketball was, but I got my opportunity to turn pro.
When you were, who was your coach? Who was your coach at North Carolina for football?
Coach Earl Edwards. The one thing about that impressed me about him too is that at the time he was graduating a little over 90% of the kids that went to school there, and I was the only person in my family to ever get a college scholarship. So, and then it was only 120 miles to thumb back and forth, so I'll take that chance.
And in those days, you could hitchhike, whereas nowadays, I think the Highway Patrol picks you up and gives you a stern lecture.
Yeah, you're right. And nowadays, it's too expensive, especially with the kind of money we made. You couldn't afford to drive back and forth.
They didn't pay like the big schools, North Carolina State, like the USC's or Washington's.
Well, probably the number one school was Carolina, the Tar Heels. We were looked on as like the junior varsity compared to Carolina. And then, of course, you had Duke, who was a little bit different school at that time.
Did you know going in to North Carolina State that you'd be given the opportunity to throw a lot?
I'm glad you asked that because just, it's like Sonny Jurgensen when he was at Duke. Sonny was 5 years before me. Sonny averaged throwing the ball 9 times a game. Can you imagine that? And when I got to state, we ran the single wing, unbalanced line, and threw the ball 12 times a game, and most of that was on third down.
Was there any temptation to move you to a different position in college?
Actually, I played goal line linebacker on defense because in high school I returned punts and kickoffs and played linebacker and quarterback. I ended up playing, of course, quarterback and starting as a cornerback, if you can imagine that, but linebacker on short yardage goal line.
You don't see many 6'5" cornerbacks.
Actually, that's true. I covered him like a blanket. I never would let him get by me.
And I'm sure when you came up on those running backs who were probably about 5'9", 5'10", weighed about 165 pounds, you had the size advantage here.
Actually, when I left New Hanover High School in Wilmington, I was 6'3", 190. And my sophomore year, because I found out how to lift weights, and I went from 190 to 235, eating moon pies and drinking Royal Crowd colas. They didn't have steroids in our day.
That was considered performance-enhancing stuff back then.
Exactly.
John Hadel mentioned the other day, one of your contemporaries, that what a great quarterback you were, and you guys had some great matchups back then.
Who said that?
John Hadel.
Oh, yeah, John and I were good buddies.
You're two guys who should be in the Hall of Fame, which I don't get what the NFL is doing. If they could put Bob Greasy and Bradshaw in, you guys are better than them at that time.
Actually, it's the guys in Rams certainly deserves it, but there are a lot of guys, and John Hadel being one, John Brody, the great 49er quarterback,
right.
Dan Pastorini. I mean, you can go on and on. There are a bunch of guys. So we have an outstanding club that aren't in as are in. Hadel, people forget, another guy they forget, of course, this guy's in the Hall. They talk about how great Jerry Rice was, and granted he was, but Lance Allworth, who's in the Hall of Fame, was every bit as good as Jerry Rice. People forget about how good he was. He was Hadel's number one target in San Diego.
I talked to Lance the other day, and he said that the only person who could stop him was the Cowboys when he went there because Bob Hayes wanted all the spotlight, and he told Bob, he goes, Bob, just run out there, and I'll catch one over the middle. And Bob goes, no, I'm not blocking. It's my team.
Can you imagine having both of those guys on your team to throw to?
Yeah.
Because Lance was a 9,500 guy, and of course Bob was, a 9,3 guy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
and Lance could probably jump out of the stadium. Well, see, John and I were the quarterbacks on the All-Star team. You remember when they used to, up in your area, they had the old Chicago All-Star game?
Right, when Otto Graham was the coach.
Yeah, John and I were the quarterbacks on that team that played the Green Bay Packers, and Lance was our top receiver.
What was Otto Graham like as a coach?
Otto was a good guy, but, Otto had a knack to be able to throw the ball very smoothly and easy. And I remember when I got up there, he tried to change me a little bit, and I wasn't used to it that time because I was taught to throw everything on the line. Otto tried to get me to put more air on the ball. When I first went to Rams camp, I had a little problem because I couldn't do that at that time. But Otto was very smart, and I enjoyed playing. He was a heck of a coach, too.
Now, coming out of college, you were the number 2 overall pick in the NFL and the number 1 pick in the American Football League.
Oh, yeah, Oakland Raiders.
And you almost signed at that time who had a substantially larger offer in terms of money. How did that all play out?
Well, see, the Raiders offered me $12,500 and a $5,000 signing bonus. And then Elroy Hirsch, who was the GM of the Rams at the time, he came to Raleigh, and we sat down, and he offered me $15,000 and a $5,000 bonus, and my head coach was handling all this because, to me, I would have signed for anything because I never saw that kind of money. And my coach said, well, if you go with the Rams and they're established and the other league's not established, you know one thing, you're going to be around for a while, and you're going to make just a little bit more money. And here's a story that people, you might know this one, David, but while we were in the old Sir Walter Raleigh Hotel in Raleigh negotiating, Elroy Hirsch gets a call, and he says, let me take this. He goes to his bedroom, and lo and behold, it was the Dallas Texans, and calling because the Oakland Raiders were finding out that I wasn't going to sign with them, so they were going to give the Texans my rights to try to get me to go there. And after I'd already done the deal with the Rams, and it came out later on that they had offered $100,000. But I wasn't never told that by Elroy Hirsch and the Rams.
Yeah. They were going to pay you $100,000. They were paying $100,000 to the Raiders to trade for you.
The Texans were going to make a deal with the Raiders, and then the Texans were going to pay me $100,000 to go there.
Yeah. That would have been a real easy decision.
I know.
Well, of course, course, the Texans owner was Lamar Hunt, and to him, $100,000 wasn't all that much money.
Oh, heck no.
And they eventually moved to Kansas City. But
that's right.
So
and then in 1966 or 65, between 65 and 66 season, remember when Al Davis was commissioner of the All-American Football League?
Sure.
And he was signing, I think he signed Ditka, he said signed all kind of guys out of the NFL trying to force the merger. And at that time I was making, let's see, that was 65. I was making $20,000, and I got an offer for 3 years, a 3-year contract from the Raiders for $100,000 a year.
I'm not real good at math, but that sounds like a tough offer to pass up.
Well, it was, but, you know, being from the South, there's a little humility involved. And George Allen was made the Rams coach at that time, and he came to my house, and that's the first time I'd ever had any kind of tech, even with the coaches that we had at that time, because they didn't give a heck about you. So he made an effort to come to my house, and he says, look, I remember in Chicago, you got to play in the second half when we were beating the Rams really bad, and you had a pretty good second half. So I never forgot that, and I think you have the talent. And I will guarantee you one thing, if you stick around, I will give you an opportunity. If you can win the job, then it'll be your job. Plus, you have to play your option out, and I don't think that you want to have these people in Los Angeles feel that you're not good enough to play. And I started thinking about that because, I don't know, you've been from the South, there's a humility involved. And I trusted George, and he said, you got to give, plus they gave me a $100,000 bonus check that I carried around in my billfold. He said, you got to send that back. And I did send it back, and I ended up, George was true to his word, I ended up starting and playing for the Rams. But later on I found out I could have kept that 100 because I think Brody did, and I'm not sure if Mike did.
Mike Ditka, I'm sure, didn't give the money back.
You know, I never regretted it because I did have an opportunity to play for good guys, good bunch of guys.
When you
the only thing I regret now is that 14 of the 22 guys that I started with George Allen, 14 of our 22 starters are dead.
Wow. Now, your first season with the Rams, 1962.
That's right.
112-1. The worst year in the Los Angeles Rams history.
And I started the last 4 games as a rookie. I only played in the last 4 games of the year, and the one tie we had was my first start against the Vikings. We tied the Vikings.
Yeah, 24-24. I mean, you went through a couple coaches that year. You started with Hall of Famer Bob Waterfield, and then you went to what, Heartland Suave?
Yeah, he was the worst coach I think I ever played for, outside of Tommy Prothero.
What was wrong with him, or he didn't understand the game?
You talking about Tommy Prothero?
Either one of them. How could they?
Harlan was a heck of a player with the New York Giants, but Harlan got called up in trying to be a Hollywood guy.
Yeah.
And then at that time, every quarterback they would continue to bring in was because Bob Waterfield, of course he's no longer with us, but anybody that Bob Waterfield recommended should be brought in. So my first 5 years in the Rams, I think we had 15 different quarterbacks.
Wow. Well,
you bring it up from 62 to 65, actually from 62 to 66, I started 22 games, I think it was, or 23 games, and we were 11-1, and the rest of the starters only won 3 games or 4 games.
And management and the coaching staff couldn't figure out anything?
Well, you see, it was like musical chairs. Every year they bring in a guy who was going to be the savior. First it was Terry Baker, who was a heck of an athlete, and if we had offenses like they have Now, Terry Baker would have been great, but as a drop back guy, he just wasn't that good of a drop back guy, but he was a tremendous talent. And then they brought in Bill Munson, who had a great arm, and Bill became friends. Bill was very good. And then they brought in Billy Guy Anderson Tulsa, who was the leading passer in college football his senior year. So those guys were the guys that they brought in.
And you had Zeke Burkowski, too.
Yeah, Zeke was there my first year. And I give Zeke a lot of credit because he sort of took me under his wing. And I felt for Zeke because those first couple of years, we didn't have an offensive line. We had a cowboy line. It was like, look out, Zeke Rugby.
But how did
Zeke was a heck of a quarterback, which we found out when he went to Green Bay, with the chances he got to play there. He just had no chance in L.A.
But how do you not win with that defense? I mean, you had the fearsome foursome. You had Lamar Lundy, Deacon Jones, Merlin Olsen. I mean, it should have been, and Rosie Greer. It should have been automatic.
Well, sometimes defenses don't always win. You still have to score points, and when you don't have a very good offensive line, Zeke never had a chance. And see, when George came in, of course, George was noted for his great defenses, and the kind of offense that we ran was don't give up the ball, keep the defense off the field. And even though we did that one year, we led the league in scoring. As good as our defense was with those fearsome foursome guys, and they're one of the best, along with the Purple People Eaters, the Dallas Doomsday, and of course the Bears under Mike Ditka and Ryan were outstanding. If we hadn't kept them off the field as much as we did, who knows whether they'd be like. See, people tend to forget a lot of times defenses are as good as they are because offenses keep them off the field. You know, you look at how good Peyton Manning is, but because he scores so many points and scores so quick, the defense never has a chance to rest. So there's a two-way street on that.
Right. Did the
Actually,
franchise...
probably the fun year I had was my first year in Philly. It was the only time in my career that I really got to throw the ball because we always got behind and we'd come back fighting and we threw the ball. And I threw the ball more in that one year, I think, than I had ever in the NFL.
Well, you led the league in passing yards. And
Yep, touchdown passes.
Yeah. And again, it was a horrible season for the team. But
yeah, we were 5-8-1. We must have lost. I think we lost 3 or 4 of those games by less than a touchdown, too. I remember we lost to Buffalo by a missed field goal.
Another one of your coaches on the Rams was Dick Vermeil. Did you realize what a good coach he was when he came?
Dick was special teams coach for the Rams. Because George was the first guy to have a special teams coach. Dick was a very enthusiastic guy and quick learner, quick study. We spent a lot of time flying back and forth after road games talking about quarterbacking and the game. And then when I got let go from the Rams and went to the Eagles, Dick became, I think, was the offensive coordinator for the Rams.
You mentioned that your coach was basically trying to be, when you first started Hollywood, what it wasn't with you guys with the Rams. It seemed like everyone wanted to be in the movies or TV. Deacon, Merlin, Rosie, you dabbled in it. You had Jack Youngblood.
Well, you got to look at it this way, David. When you're making $15,000, $20,000 a year for 6 months of football, and they offer you $32,000 to make a movie, like I did with John Wayne, and you only spend 3 months, hey, you got to take it. Well, I made more money making that movie than I did playing football that year.
I was going to say, you don't need to be an academic All-American to know that's a good way to supplement your income.
You just have to go to class.
What was John Wayne like to work with?
He was exactly right. Great American. I actually think John Wayne thought he was a real cowboy. it was interesting because the first time I met him, he says to me, "Well, you were a pretty good football player. You made MVP." And he said, "But you got to know one thing about me. I'm probably one of the great movie stars." And I already knew that because anybody that was raised when we were, you knew about John Wayne. He says, "Now, since you're playing my adopted son in this movie, I want you to know something. There's only 3 ways. It's your way, which will be wrong. It's my way, which will be right. And there's nobody else's way. So since you're my adopted son in this movie, I suggest you play it my way." I said, "I have no problem with that, Mr. Wayne." He says, "Now, when you get to know me, you call me Duke."
You also were on Gilligan's Island, which I assume is a little bit different than being in The Undefeated with John Wayne.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was a $1,500 gig. And there was a guy in there that was the head native, Chief Eddie Little Sky. And since that time, when I see a lot of these he's in all these old cowboy movies, and they told me I was going to have to speak native, and so I asked it. I said, "Hey, lady, how do you speak native?" He said, "Just make something up." Like, blah, 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 blah. I said, "Okay, I'll do that." It was fun though because those people, and as you know, Gilligan's Island is still on all the time.
Oh, exactly.
And I got to meet every one of those people on that set were just unbelievably nice.
But I don't get, they had you play an Indian, but you're Filipino.
I know, but nobody knew but me. A funny story. I used to, because they shot that at Burbank on the lot at Burbank. People used to think this was out in the ocean and an island. They had a fake island on Burbank Studio. So afterwards, I get my car and drive home, and I lived up in the Granada Hills, which was like 30 miles from Burbank. And I still have my makeup on and the wig, and people were driving by because, oh my God, they let this guy out of jail. Look at him.
Yeah, I heard that island was right off, you could see it off the expressway.
You could, I thought.
Another show was Laugh-In, which is before David's time, but I remember it quite well. What was that experience like?
Oh, that was a crack up because first, I think that was one where the floor fell through.
Okay.
And they were doing a spoof on me, and the floor fell through, and I fall down in this hole. It was a crack up. I think the funniest thing I ever did though was I did Skidoo with Jackie Gleason and Frank Gorshin and a whole bunch of other people, but they made this movie in sections because it's the world's worst movie. And the scene that I was a guard in a jail with the Gorshin and Gleason in the same cell. It was only like probably a 2-minute part I had, but it lasted 30 minutes to take because Gorshin and Gilligan or Gleason would never stop cracking jokes.
You had some big guys in that movie. You had Carol, and women. You had, like you said, Gorshin. You had Jackie Gleason. You had Groucho Marx, Mickey Rooney, Cesar Romero, Burgess Meredith, Peter Lawford. It was kind of like It's a Mad, Mad World.
It was like an all-star. Only 2 I saw was Gleason and Gorshin because I think everything they did with these different groups and just stuck the movie together. It was terrible. You got to admit it was a terrible movie.
I'll have to watch it.
I know. I guess I waited because I'd never seen it. And about 7 years ago, I'm up watching late night TV and it was on. I said, "Oh God, I was in that thing."
Getting back to football, did the Rams?
Say what?
You remember football? Football?
Football. Yeah.
Did the Rams change when Carroll Rosenblum became the owner, when he traded the Colts for the Rams?
Well, not necessarily. Where we changed was, of course, I wasn't there when I got let go when his first year there. Where we changed was when George left and went to Washington, and we got Coach Prothro, and the first thing he did when he gathered us to a meeting, he says, I don't believe guys over 30 can play football. And I started looking around and said, well, that means that myself, Merlin Olsen, my roommate, Deacon Jones, about half the team will just get up and walk out.
Yeah, because you and Merlin were both drafted in the first round in '62.
Yeah, and from that day, we were roommates in camp and also on the road for 11 years. Oh, that's another first. The Rams have never had a quarterback that's played for 11 years.
And they still haven't.
So,
Yeah.
so Merlin couldn't get you on Grizzly Adams or something?
Actually, Merlin was responsible for getting me on the Undefeated because he knew the director and the the guy who wrote the movie.
The directed out. I'm trying to think who that was. I'll have to look that up. How did you avoid the Brady Bunch, or that was Deacon Jones' deal?
Well, Deacon and I did Wonder Woman together.
What was Linda Carter like?
Oh, Lord, I'm telling you, if I hadn't been married that time, I'd probably had another divorce.
She still looks good for her age.
I'll tell you, I saw her the other night on the rerun of 2.5 Men.
Yes.
Yes, she was gorgeous.
Yeah.
Who was the leader of the defense? Was it Deacon or was it Merlin?
I would say we had to. Actually, the real leader of that defense was Maxie Bond. And the next guy would have been another guy who should be in the Hall. A little free safety, Eddie Metter.
Okay. And you had Jack Pardee, another great coach.
You know, Maxie was the number one signal caller, and if Maxie wasn't there, then Jack was. We had two outstanding, they're very smart guys. Because as you're probably well aware, in Georgia's defense, you didn't have to wait to halftime to adjust. Because those two linebackers could get the call from George and adjust on the movement of the ball.
Here, the director of the Undefeated was Andrew McLaughlin.
Yeah, Andrew McLaughlin. And Andy Finnerty was the guy, the producer. Him and Robert Jackson, Merlin knew all three of them.
So he put in a good word for you?
Yeah, Merlin, because I think it was after, during Christmas holidays, and we played a game, and Merlin said that Andy Finnerty was having a gathering, like a holiday deal at his house, and all these people from the Undefeated that was going to be shot were going to be there, and it asked Merlin to ask if I'd like to come. If it wasn't Merlin, I probably never would have showed up. So I showed up, and I met these people and said, well, we'd like for you to take a test with the gal, Melissa Newman, who played the little young gal in the movie.
Right, Charlotte Langdon.
Yeah. So that next week I went down and did an audition, and well, I was pretty good with women, so I knew I had a good shot.
You had another beautiful woman you worked with in that movie, Lee Merriweather.
Oh, boy, what a special lady she was. Miss America.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And
the other gal, Melissa McCargo, Marion McCargo, I think that was her first movie. She was married to the guy that owned Bell Telephone or something like that.
Oh, Richard Moses. Or
right.
Or Alonzo Bell.
Sorry?
Alonzo Bell. Or Alfonso Bell.
Yeah, that's who she was married to.
And besides John Wayne, we can't forget Rock Hudson.
That probably was the big part of the movie. You remember that part of the movie where at night it was he and Hudson were trading off drinks and talking?
Right.
Everybody stuck around just to see that because John Wayne can be an intimidator, and you knew he was going to try and intimidate Rock Hudson. It was the first time they ever worked together. And give Hudson a lot of credit. He hung in there, and that might have been one of the best parts of the whole movie Bruce Cabot handing them the booze, and it was well worthwhile.
Was it real liquor or was it just water?
Iced tea.
Iced tea.
Yeah.
So
no,
afterwards,
the Duke with his it's when you watch his movies, he has almost the same bunch in. So after shooting, sometimes they'd get together and drink some tequila. Duke liked tequila.
Tough on the
system. You know who else was in that movie? You remember the guy? You remember High Chaparral?
Yeah.
Don Collier. He was one of the Southern group of the Duke.
Okay.
He was a big star at High Chaparral. Of course, you had the great Hal Needham was a stunt director.
Oh yeah. Sounds like a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Well, you know, the little Filipino-Irish kid comes to the big city and never realized all the things he got a chance to do.
Yeah.
Was there any thought in the NFL to move you to a different position because you were Filipino and they thought it was a white person's position?
Well, actually, during practices, because I was generally the third quarterback, I would play middle linebacker on when the defense gave the offensive picture. And then early on, when Harlan Savary took over, I was a backup receiver and tight end. And later on, Harlan actually made a comment, said that he felt like I should be a tight end. Heck, I didn't mind. But then when George came, that's when I got my opportunity to be the starter.
Don't the quarterbacks get all the girls?
Well, also the quarterbacks pay out the most money to all the girls.
Only if you divorce them.
Yeah. I have no regrets.
That's good. Did you encounter much discrimination on or off the playing field because you're the first Asian American?
You know, that's the beautiful part about the NFL. The NFL, everybody looks at you as to what you can do with your athletic skills. They don't look at your color or what you are. They look at what kind of football player you are. And then later on when you retire, they look at you and see if you're still a football player or you're really a good guy person. And I prefer to be a good guy person and a former football player.
Yeah. Makes sense. When you were at the Eagles, did you ever overthrow Harold Carmichael? Because I would think that would be next to impossible.
See, that's something that these modern-day colored people don't tell you, that when you're a tall quarterback, it's a lot easier to throw to guys that are tall. And I think that's another reason why I probably had one of my best years throwing, over and above the fact I threw more passes that year than I ever did in one season. Because when you're tall and you have tall guys, I had Carmichael at 6'8", Charlie Young at 6'5", and Don Zimmerman at 6'4". You don't have to throw through alleys. You throw over people. And that's one thing these people forget to tell you is that when you're tall and have tall receivers, even when you're short, it makes it easier for you to throw the football. I don't know. I couldn't tell you if I ever had any balls knocked out during those years I played with the Eagles.
What was your favorite moment in football?
My favorite moment?
Yes.
Oh, I guess it would be a couple. Of course, in '69, when the league, the players nominate you and you become the so-called MVP. And then when I got traded to Philadelphia, when the Rams basically thought that I was done, I was actually runner-up to O.J. Simpson. If he don't gain 2,000 yards, I got the MVP again, so I finished the runner-up to him. Comeback player of the year, which I never could figure out, because I never went anywhere. I just went to another team. But actually, the really one that makes, in 1973, a former tight end for the Eagles' daughter had leukemia, So Mr. Toast, who, by the way, Leonard Toast was one of the greatest owners and guys that I ever met. He decided that we, as the Philadelphia Eagles, were going to raise money to build a wing on Children's Hospital, just specifically to try to find a cure for leukemia. And we needed to raise $800,000 to start it. And because of Leonard Toast and I think it was Dave Hill, or I know his last name was a former tight end, that's how Eagles Fly for Leukemia got started. We raised $800,000, and I was the first chairman of that movement. And we built the first Ronald McDonald house in the world in Philadelphia. And then from '74, from that time on, I don't know if it's still going on or not, Dave, the green shakes that McDonald's used to make.
Yeah, the Shamrock Shakes.
Yeah, that money went to the Eagles Fly for Leukemia because of the green color.
I never knew that.
And in '73, if your child had leukemia, I think it was like a 9% chance that they would ever survive. Now, from what I understand, it's somewhere close to 90%. And my accountant in Los Angeles, his daughter got leukemia at age 15, and he knew that I was involved with Eagles Fly for Leukemia, so I called the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia and explained to them. They said, well, there's a leukemia wing in Santa Monica, so I called them, and they saw his daughter, and they gave her, I'm going to say, like 20 more years of life. She was 15. I think she finally passed away around 35. So that would be maybe the most meaningful thing that I was involved in.
Was that your introduction into doing charitable work? Because since then you've done numerous events that have helped raise money for a variety of causes.
That's correct. In fact, from that experience in '74, because I was living in Philly, it was so doggone cold there to try to condition. So I got me a condominium in Rancho Mirage, California, and I'd go back in the off-season. So I started Eagles Fly for Leukemia charity golf tournament there, which was a 3-day event. We had Chargers, Rams, Raiders, and 49ers. Raised a lot of money for Eagles Fly for Leukemia.
Do you still do your golf outing every year?
You know, we did in my hometown for 30 years. And I do one in Greensboro now, North Carolina for diabetes. And one that's coming up in Aiken, South Carolina for the Chamber of Commerce. And then I do one just for all my friends that I've gotten to know over the years, which is not, and we try to reward the veterans that live in this area.
When you joined the Eagles, number 18 became number 5, and eventually number 18 again.
Well, see what happened is that when I got the Eagles, Ben Hawkins, their great wide receiver, he had 18, and I would learned a long time ago, you don't want to piss off your wide receivers. So I decided to take 5 because my first name has 5 letters, and my birthday was August 5th. And actually, I should have probably kept 5 because I had my best individual year with 5. And then the next year, Ben broke his leg, so he had to retire, so I got 18. The Lord works in mysterious ways.
How did you end up going into broadcasting?
Oh, I got to know Freddie Dreyer pretty good, and he had a guy that was producer at CBS. Oh, Bob Stinner. I don't know if you know the name or not.
No,
yeah. Well, Freddie contacted Stinner for me and said, why don't he'd like to broadcast the NFL games. And so Stinner said, well, fine. So I met, I think it's Bob. And so he sent me, and I did an audition on a New York Giants preseason game. And I worked with CBS, did some college all-star games and some NFL games for about 3 or 4 years.
How did you miss going on Hunter with Fred Dreyer?
He didn't ask me to.
Couldn't you nudge him and say, listen, I'm an experienced actor?
I know Freddie, he's amazing. When he came to us from the Giants, he slept in a Volkswagen bus. He showered at the stadium and showered in the ocean. He was a real talent. You know, he's from San Diego. He was a real San Diego hippie.
Okay.
And now all of a sudden he's got money, has a mansion, and I think he's producing too now. He's a great guy, though.
You are the last football coach at Cal Poly Pomona. You were there from 80 to 82.
Yeah, and we were the only. My staff was the only staff to beat Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. That's what we're famous for.
Okay. What was that experience like?
You know, it was a pretty good experience. The only problem, they didn't tell me that when I took the job, that the previous coaching staff, who didn't win any games at all, had got him under probation. So when I took the job, and it wasn't my opportunity, because at that time I was an assistant coach at a junior college out in Palm Desert. So I took the job, and it was a pretty good experience. With the staff that was there before us, they had $35,000 in scholarships, and they were broken down in thirds. Half the team was on $225 scholarships. And then we went to work, and with my contacts and a lot of the guys that were coaching for me, we raised a lot of money. So then, lo and behold, they decided to drop the program and take our money and distribute to all the other sports.
Yeah.
And I think they end up dropping basketball too, if I'm not mistaken.
Well,
Was Jack Snow your favorite receiver?
Well, with the Rams, yes. Nobody came across the middle like Jack Snow. And he's the only guy I know that could run Jack ran like a 4.7 40, but with his uniform on, and once he got out in front, nobody could ever catch him.
and he didn't drop too many passes, did he?
No, especially if they're over the middle. The ones he couldn't get he had trouble running away from people. I never could understand that. If you send him on an out route or to the corner, he had trouble running those routes. We stayed up to practice all the time and worked those routes. But you send him across the middle, he was fearless.
Now, you're the only quarterback from, your era to still rank in the lowest interception percentage in the NFL history. What made you so successful?
Well, the great Ted Marchibroda taught me more about reading defenses than anybody that I ever played with before. I think knowing where people were going to be, not just your defensive backs, but knowing where linebackers were going to be, and also being maybe stronger than most quarterbacks, even though it was a positive, but sometimes maybe a negative. But I attribute that knowing defenses and being strong in the pocket and not running out of bounds and sliding gave me the opportunity to basically stay on my feet longer.
Do you think you're ever going to get in the Hall of Fame?
Well, like I told you, Fadel and Brody and Don Meredith, God bless his soul, he was tough. Pastorini, Joe Cap, Kilmer, we're all in our own Hall of Fame. You're just lucky enough to have the opportunity to play, because when I grew up, nobody would thought a little Philippine-Irish kid could ever play in the NFL. But me.
Who vote on the Hall may never have seen you. It's like you have to go through a veterans committee and hope you have a friend or two on it, and everybody's in a good mood and remembers the success that you had. And nowadays,
the thing that gets me though, like baseball has the Hall of Fame Veterans Committee, and if a Veterans Committee chooses you, you go in. But for some reason in the football, like one guy like Jerry Kramer, he's never been in. But one year the Veterans Committee chose him, but yet these guys who never put a jockstrap on, that are on the board, a lot of them young guys, never put him in. So if the Veteran Committee chooses you, shouldn't that be enough? I don't know.
Exactly, because Jerry Kramer and Dick Stanfill are the only two players that were finalists for the Hall of Fame twice by the Veterans Committee and aren't in, which is ridiculous. Like you said, they should put him in.
I agree with you, 100%.
And then they make a guy like Jack Butler wait 50 years to put him in.
I know. And then some guys, when they're dead.
Yeah. And,
I say I'm going to shock them.
You going to come back?
If I die, or when I die, and the Lord tells me, you just got put in the Hall of Fame. I said, well, let me go down, make sure they can't see me, and I'll just go down and speak, and nobody will know.
Is that the Book of Romans or the Book of Roman?
It's the Book of Roman, right?
And the angel Gabriel will bring you down.
Oh, that would be something, wouldn't it?
What was the best defense you ever went up against, other than in practice?
Ooh, gosh, there was some. The team that hurt us the most, that we got beat up, was the Bears. Doug Atkins, Ed Obradovic, that bunch. Bill George before we got him. I mean, you might beat him, but you're gonna get beat up.
And the toughest guy wasn't even on that defense. The toughest guy was the running back, Rick Caceres.
I know. And Joe Marconi.
Exactly. Yeah. Those guys they told the story, Ditka, or Obradovich, that Caceres hit a guy outside a bar. They thought he killed him.
I know. And the Detroit Lions were pretty good, too. Roger Brown, Alex Karras, Brett Snyder, all those good. They were tough.
Yeah, Joe Schmidt.
But, yeah, Joe Smith. And then people tend to forget, as good as the Packers were, they were pretty good on Willie Davis, Lionel Aldridge, and Kostelnik. Yeah. And the great Ray Nitschke. He was the two guys that I thought were the best going at that position at the time were your guy Butkus, and nobody was better than him, but Nitschke was right there with him. But when you looked at total team defense, the Vikings and the Cowboys were pretty good.
And a guy who was a little before your time from Philadelphia, Chuck Bednarik, he wasn't too shabby either.
Oh, too late. When I got to Philly, he came to practice. He was amazing. From what I understand, he still is, but he's got a little mental problem now.
When he came to practice, he didn't put on the pads, did he?
He wanted to. Yeah, he's a god in Philadelphia. Yeah. Could be.
You can't tell if he's got a screw loose from too many hits to the head, or he was always like that, because till this day he's still mad at Frank Gifford.
Oh, that's what I tell people when I would go out and speak. When I used to get a lot of chances to go out and speak, I said, now look, if I stutter a little bit and forget something, somebody raise their hand and remind me, because I had like 6 to 7 Excedrin headaches when I played. That's what we used to call them, because nobody said you had a concussion, you had to go back and play. If it was a 3 Excedrin headache, they'd hold you out for a quarter. But as long as it was a 1 or 2, you could go back and play.
And they weren't giving you Excedrin at that time either.
No, it was aspirin.
Did Deacon Jones ever give you the head slaps or no?
I'm sorry?
Did Deacon ever give you the head slaps in practice?
Oh, yeah. That's the one thing remember we got Bob Brown from the Eagles, who was a great tackle? And most teams, you have what they call thud practice, which is a full blast, except you just don't quite give it the 100%. But throughout practices, Deacon and Bob would work on their individual techniques, and occasionally Deke would drive Bob back into me, and I'd get a little tap on the head. He said, "I'm here." I said, "I know it's you."
You never did any needle pointing with Rosie Greer?
I never forget that my rookie year, I was walking past Rosie's room, and he said, "Come here, Rook." So I walked in, he was playing a guitar and needle pointing. I said, "My goodness, how can you do that? You've been a strong football player." He said, "Well, I do this to relax. So just be quiet and sit down and listen and watch." I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Greer."
Now,
he's the gentle giant.
Another of your favorite receivers, I believe, was a fellow out of Oklahoma, Tommy McDonald.
Oh, yeah, we got Tommy from the Eagles, and I'll never forget when Tommy first came, I was running number 3, and so I couldn't get anybody to stay out after practice to catch my passes, so I used to get a bag of balls and throw it at the goalpost. And as long as you hit the goalpost, it would bounce back to you, but if you missed it, you had to go round up the balls. And Tommy one day saw me out there and says, "Hey, kid, you got a good arm. Here, let's run some routes." And I give Tommy McDonald, I love that guy. He would stay out and catch passes, and lo and behold, in '65, when I played, I forgot how many games I played the last 4 games of the season, and I just happened to be against Cleveland, Baltimore, Green Bay. Oh, I'm trying to think of the other team in the American League was really good. But against Cleveland, Tommy caught four of my touchdown passes. So it paid off that man, that veteran Hall of Fame guy now, took time to catch an old guy that didn't get to play much.